Have you ever been pushed so far that you finally said, enough is enough? That's exactly where I found myself the day the HOA decided to cross the one line I never thought anyone would dare touch. My ranch animals. They weren't just animals to me. They were family. They were history. They were the soul of my land. Every morning, the sound of roosters crowing was my alarm clock. Every evening, the gentle mooing of my cows told me the day was almost done. The horses, the goats, the chickens, each one had a place, each one had a purpose. But to the HOA, they were nothing but a nuisance. At first, I thought it was just another one of those petty HOA complaints. You know the kind. Paint your fence a shade. Cut your grass every Saturday. Don't leave your truck parked for more than 12 hours. Annoying, yes, but manageable. But then came the letter. It was written in bold, cold words. You are hereby ordered to remove all livestock from the premises. Your land is not zoned for ranch animals under HOA guidelines. My jaw dropped when I read it. Remove all livestock? They might as well have told me to cut out my own heart. These animals weren't a hobby. They weren't decorations. They were my livelihood. They were my way of life. Without them, what was I? And that's where the fight began. I went to the next HOA meeting, letter in hand, and slammed on the table in front of the board. You can't do this, I said, my voice louder than I intended. This land has been a ranch for generations. My grandfather raised cattle here. My father raised cattle here. And now you're telling me I can't keep my animals? The board president looked at me like I was some unruly child. He adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and said, Rules are rules. The HOA has spoken. If you refuse to comply, we will fine you $500 per day until the animals are removed. $500 per day. Can you imagine? That was more than what most of those board members made at their cushy jobs. They thought they could squeeze me, force me into submission, choke me financially until I surrendered. But here's the thing about ranchers. We don't back down. Days passed, then weeks. The HOA sent more letters, each one harsher than the last. They threatened liens. They threatened lawsuits. They threatened everything they could throw at me. But I kept feeding my animals. I kept milking the cows. I kept riding my horses across my land, daring them to come and stop me. Neighbors started whispering. Some were scared of the HOA and kept their distance, but others came by to offer quiet support. We're with you, they'd say, dropping off bags of feed or just offering a pat on the shoulder. And then one morning, everything exploded. I woke up to the sound of trucks pulling into my driveway. I stepped outside and saw a group of HOA representatives, clipboards in hand, marching like they owned the place. Behind them, a tow truck was parked. A tow truck for my animals. They actually thought they could tow my livestock like they were junk cars. I stormed out, blocking their path. Get off my land, I shouted. The president sneered at me. You've been warned. We're here to enforce HOA policy. The animals are being removed today. That's when I pulled out my phone and made one call, just one, to the county sheriff. Now, let me tell you about Sheriff Daniels. He wasn't just law enforcement. He was a man who understood the land. He grew up on a farm himself. He knew what it meant to sweat under the sun, to raise animals, to live by the rhythm of the earth. Within minutes, his squad car rolled up the drive. He stepped out, hand on his belt, and looked at the HOA like they were a bunch of lost tourists. What seems to be the problem here? He asked calmly. The president puffed out his chest. This homeowner is in violation of HOA guidelines. We're here to enforce removal of livestock. Sheriff Daniels raised an eyebrow. Livestock, huh? On his own land. Yes, the president snapped. It's against the rules. That's when the sheriff did something I'll never forget. He stepped forward, looked the president dead in the eye, and said, Sir, this land is sovereign. This man's property falls under county and state jurisdiction, not your little neighborhood rules. You have no authority here. The silence was thick. You could feel the weight of those words hanging in the air. Sovereign. My land was sovereign. The president stammered, trying to argue, but the sheriff cut him off. If you or anyone from this HOA steps foot on this ranch again without a legal warrant, you'll be trespassing, and I will personally escort you off in handcuffs." That was the moment the tide turned. The HOA members looked at each other, pale as ghosts. They had no backup plan. Their power only worked when people believed in it. But standing there with the sheriff by my side, I realized the truth. Their rules stopped at my fence line. They packed up their clipboards, muttered something about revisiting this, and retreated down my driveway. The tow truck followed, engine growling like a defeated beast. When they were gone, Sheriff Daniels turned to me, tipped his hat, and said, "Don't let them bully you. This is your land. Don't ever forget that." But the fight wasn't over. Oh no, the HOA wasn't done with me yet. They hate losing, and this loss, it burned them. They weren't just embarrassed, they were furious. I knew they'd be back, with new tricks, new threats, maybe even new lawsuits. But I also knew something else. They had awakened something inside me, a fire, a determination. I wasn't just going to defend my animals anymore. I was going to expose them, challenge them, and show every homeowner in the county that the HOA's power was built on fear. And fear only works if you give in. This wasn't just about chickens and cows anymore. It was about freedom. And let me tell you, the war was just beginning. Call to action. Backhand index pointing, right? If you've ever been pushed by an HOA, if you've ever felt powerless against their rules, stay tuned for what happened next, because the way this story unfolds will shock you. The HOA thought they had me cornered, but what happened in Section 2 will leave you speechless. Have you ever noticed how bullies don't quit after they lose once? They come back harder, sneakier, and meaner, because the one thing they can't stand is losing face. And trust me, the HOA hated that day when the sheriff stood on my porch and declared my land sovereign. They hated it so much that I could practically feel their anger burning across the neighborhood. At first, it was quiet. Too quiet. Weeks went by without a letter, a fine, or a knock on my door. I thought maybe, just maybe, they had learned their lesson. Maybe they had realized they couldn't control me. But then the storm started. It began with whispers. Neighbors told me the HOA was holding secret meetings where my name came up again and again. They weren't talking about lawn care or fence paint. No, they were plotting. They were searching for loopholes, for new ways to squeeze me out. Then came the rumors. People began saying my animals were dangerous, that my cows were a threat to children walking by, that my roosters were too loud and disturbing the peace. Someone even claimed they saw one of my goats escape and chase a kid down the street. All lies, all planted by the HOA. But lies have power when they spread fast enough. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy with animals. I was being painted as the neighborhood villain, the reckless rancher who put everyone else in danger. And that was exactly what the HOA wanted. Turn the people against me, make me the outcast, and then swoop in for the kill. Sure enough, another letter arrived. But this time, it wasn't from the HOA. It was from their lawyer. "You are hereby notified of intent to pursue legal action regarding public safety violations caused by your livestock." Public safety violations. Can you believe that? My chickens, my cows, my goats. Suddenly they were a menace to society. It was laughable, but it wasn't funny, because lawsuits meant money, and money was the HOA's favorite weapon. I knew what they were trying to do, bleed me dry with legal fees until I gave up. But what they didn't know was that I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. Remember Sheriff Daniels? Turns out, word of my fight had spread further than I thought. Other ranchers, farmers, and even folks in town started reaching out. They told me their own stories. Stories of HOAs overstepping, bullying, and trying to erase traditions that had existed long before their cookie-cutter rules were written. One older rancher, Mr. Collins, came by with a folder full of documents. "These," he said, "are historical land use records. Your ranch is classified as agricultural land under county law. HOA rules don't touch agricultural land. You need to take this to court." That was the weapon I needed. So when the HOA finally dragged me into the courtroom, I didn't walk in scared. I walked in ready. The judge sat high above us, looking down with tired eyes. The HOA's lawyer strutted in like he owned the place, dropping a pile of complaints on the table. He painted me as a lawless rancher, a reckless neighbor, a man who thought he was above the rules. Then it was my turn. I stood, heart pounding, and laid out the truth. I told the story of my family's history on the land. I explained how the HOA had tried to trespass, how they brought a tow truck of my animals, how the sheriff himself had declared my land sovereign. And then I handed the judge Mr. Collins' folder. Historical records, agricultural zoning, proof that my land had been a working ranch for generations, and nothing in the HOA's handbook could erase that. The courtroom went silent. The judge flipped through the pages, nodded slowly, and finally spoke. This court rules in favor of the defendant. The homeowner's property is legally recognized as agricultural land. HOA restrictions do not apply. Case dismissed. Case dismissed. Just like that. The HOA lawyer's jaw nearly hit the floor. The board members muttered in shock. They had just been crushed, publicly, legally, and permanently. But here's the best part. The judge didn't just dismiss the case. He issued a warning. He looked at the HOA board members and said, "This court will not tolerate further harassment of this property owner. Any future attempts to enforce HOA rules on this land will be considered harassment and subject to penalties." In other words, checkmate. I walked out of that courtroom a free man. My animals were safe. My ranch was safe. And the HOA, they were humiliated in front of the entire community. But victory wasn't just about me. The story spread like wildfire. Newspapers picked it up. Local radio stations talked about it. Suddenly, I wasn't just a rancher defending his animals. I was a symbol of standing up to HOA bullies everywhere. Other homeowners started speaking out. Some who had been too scared to fight finally found their voices. "If he can win, so can we," they said. Meetings got heated. The HOA's grip on the neighborhood started to slip. And you know what? That was the sweetest revenge of all. One evening, as the sun set over my fields and the animals settled in for the night, I stood by the fence and thought about everything that had happened. The battles, the threats, the courtroom showdown. The HOA had tried to break me. They tried to strip me of my way of life, to erase generations of history, to silence me with fear. But instead, they did the opposite. They made me stronger. They made me louder. They made me fight not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been crushed under their rules. And I realized something important. Sometimes, when you stand your ground, you don't just win your own freedom. You inspire others to fight for theirs. So if you're listening to this right now, and you ever felt like the rules were stacked against you, if you've ever felt small under the weight of people who think they own you, remember my story. Remember the rancher who said no. Remember the sheriff who declared the land sovereign. Remember the courtroom where the truth won, because bullies only win if you let them. And sometimes, the smallest act of defiance can turn into a victory no one saw coming. Call to action. Backhand index pointing right if this story fired you up. Don't just stop here. Share it, talk about it. And remember, no matter how big the fight looks, you're never as powerless as they want you to believe. Stand tall, speak out, and never let fear decide your future.